Welcome to the Simply Love Jesus podcast. We are starting a new series called Be Good News. I have a lineup of amazing conversations with wonderful people. And by the end of each episode, my desire is for you to have practical advice on how to make a difference wherever you are. Before I introduce my first guest in this series, here are a couple of things I'd love for you to know. One, if you would like to help build the Simply Love Jesus ministry across the country, I'm inviting you to join my group chat. Just send me a message on any of my social media platforms. I'm looking for volunteers, either people who just enjoy chatting online and making new friends, or people who have a desire to build a ministry in your town. So if either of those are you, send me a message. I'm also going to ask that you go and subscribe to the Simply Love Jesus YouTube channel. Over the next year, I'm praying that my online ministry will reach over 1,000 people who are eager to learn how to love God and love people. My first guest is Ortinel G. Ortinel is a rapper from Australia. He uses his music and his online ministry to speak truth and facilitate conversations about faith. Throughout the episode, I will be including some music breaks. One, to feature his awesome music. The second reason is for you to have a bit of a pause in the midst of the very deep and incredible conversation that me and Ortinel have. You might notice some audio inconsistencies. I'm going to ask that you forgive me. Ran into some technical difficulties, and I had to do the best with what I have. You may not even notice it because the conversation that me and Ortinel have is it's really good. I'm really excited for you to listen to it. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I hope you take in all that Ortinel has to share. And I hope that you continue to tune into this series because my desire is for you to be good news to the world around you. And through these episodes, you are going to learn how to do that. As always, if there's anything that you need prayer for, send me a message.
They're preaching from the stage with a counterfeit claim, saying Jesus wore a flag, but that's just dragging his name. Kingdom man America, don't be twisting his words in vain. True pulse from the cross, not the valley, so you can keep them chains. Yet they shout persecution while they're swinging the sword. But Christ took him now, he in one full war. Highline till they just left faith. Look, that's just fear on a loose. The spirit moves hearts, ain't no one change but some rules. And your worship of nostalgia, take it back to the 50s. Cause the kingdom wants a culture, every nation been redeemed. From Palestine to Perth, man, the mission don't pause. Our God ain't American, and Christ is Lord of all. Let's go.
So, Ortinel, man, what do you do for fun? We don't know each other super well, which is great because, and I actually love this. So every time I bring someone onto the podcast, I always love it because a lot of other podcasters, they try to do like a lot of research beforehand. They try to do a lot of stuff. And I actually don't. I actually go the opposite. I want to go in blind because I love being able to capture conversations and meet people in general. And so I love when I get to bring people on and get to just learn more about them and learn more about their heart. And I think that's such a better way for people to experience others' passions. It's not so pre-prepared. So what do you do for fun lately? What is fun for you?
That was very authentic, and I agree. I think that's a really good approach to it. It's just then the conversation is more authentic. In terms of what I sort of do for fun, I'm a rapper, I'm a hip hop artist. I'm a Christian rapper, so that's one of the many hats that I wear. But in terms of so I'm always writing, I'm always working on music, I'm always writing music. That's something that keeps me really busy. I'm a big muso as well, as we would say in Australia. I'm really heavily into my music. I listen to all sorts of things, heavily hip hop, but I listen to everything, a bit of everything. So I spend a lot of time doing that. I'm an avid reader.
Oh, good. What are you reading these days?
What am I reading these days? So I've been able to get on the Baker's Press. They had this thing where they were doing getting a bit of a review group together, like a few reviewers who can just start reading group. So I was able to get onto that, which they've been able to hook me up with some books before they come out.
That's
So
really cool.
I'm going through some of those books at the moment. But a few books that I recently finished reading, The Vision of Ephesians by N.T. Wright.
Yeah, N.T. Wright. I love N.T. Wright. I have the last book of his I read was the New Testament in its world.
Ooh,
That's
with Mike Bird.
Yeah, that's a thick read,
Yeah.
but it's a
Yeah.
it's really
Oh,
good.
it is
It's more of an academic text, but
Yeah.
of course, because I spend so much time in like theology, I'm just like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
just like casual.
Yeah,
read.
exactly. It's like casual bedtime reading.
That's right.
Yeah. No, it's such a good resource. I have it on my shelf as well. For Bible studies, like if we're anywhere in the New Testament, that usually ends up coming out. So I finished reading that, and I love N.T. Wright. I have literally a full section on my shelf just dedicated to N.T. Wright. I always joke around with my wife that I want to get his face tattooed on my legs. And yeah, she'll never let me. She's like, you're not getting another man's face tattooed on your leg.
That's right. There's a lot of questions behind it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The another good one along with N.T. Wright is last year I dove a lot into Michael Heisner. So he's a great writer. Read his book The Unseen Realm. That's a really good one. And then I use a lot mainly for his commentary, but Robert Alter, he is he's a really interesting author because he's an agnostic, but he is considered like the foremost biblical scholar on the Old Testament. And it's really interesting. So he's like the most well-known scholar, and he has such a love. He only is an expert in the Old Testament and as a scholar in it simply because he just loves the Bible, despite he's an agnostic. It's just a really interesting relationship. So I think he approaches it with such like a natural, just academic, and yet at the same time he just nerds out about it. So he has these amazing books I love, like for example, The Art of Biblical Poetry is one of his that he wrote. He does a couple of them, like The Art of Biblical Narrative, but he was most well known because he made his own entire commentary of the Hebrew Bible. And it's really, 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 really good. So I think it pairs well a lot with N.T. Wright's work. If you want to, that's a good one to check out. But
I definitely will. He's definitely going to be on my list next year. Just pick up the one you mentioned. Actually, I might try to pick that up. Did you say the poetry?
Yes, the Art of Biblical Poetry.
The Art of Biblical Poetry.
Yeah.
And I'll try.
It's really
look
good.
into that.
Really, really, really good. Well, thank you again for jumping on and having this conversation with me. I think the big overarching idea that I've been really wanting to have, and why brought you on, and I'll bring on some other people later, is having this idea of what it means to be good news. And I really want to emphasize this idea of what it means to be good news, because I think in our modern Christianity, we've become so obsessed with preaching the good news, preaching the gospel, and preaching these things, and yet in the midst of preaching the gospel, we've forgotten what it means to be the gospel. One of the things that it's at least one of these quotes that I consistently float, and I'll put it in a future book, but one of the things that I've said a lot is that the gospel is not just something you believe in, the gospel is something you become. And that's the whole point of following Jesus, is that we become the good news.
Yes.
That's the whole point of following Jesus. It is not just something that you believe. It's not just something you follow. It's not just something you check off your box. You go to church. You go, oh my God, yes, Jesus. Like it's literally, it's supposed to be something you embody. You become.
Yes.
You are supposed to. I was telling my wife this the other day, that the greatest point of spiritual maturity that you can reach is that you can have, with full conviction in your heart, being willing to lay down your life for the rest of the world. Like if you can go to the point where you would be willing, even though Jesus came, died for all of our sins, and he took the sins of the world and that whole thing and what he did on the cross through his resurrection. But if it was up to you and you had to offer your life as the sin for the sins of the world. That is the ultimate point of spiritual maturity, to have the Spirit of God and to walk in his footsteps and to do what he did. And we have that is missing so much right now in the world around us, with the way that the church has kind of fallen to this nationalism. And we have American Christianity has kind of decided to use, I guess, some more grotesque language, has prostituted its witness for the trade of power and money and greed and influence. We've made Christianity is no longer something we become. It's just a brand. And we've branded Christianity. It's just a nice thing that we put on a shirt. We get our little coffee mugs and we're like, oh my God, Jesus. But the moment that push comes to shove and people are actually suffering, people are actually needing hope and restoration, and not just spiritual, that they will actually provide physical liberation, that we have fallen short and we've dropped the ball.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, that churches have been so used to branding Christianity that they don't know what it means to be Christianity. And so I'd love for us specifically, just what resonates on just like a general idea. When you kind of saw me reach out and you had this idea of being good news, what's the first thing that kind of resonates to your heart? And then we'll kind of narrow it down more specifically, because I know you wanted to talk a lot about, I think it was, we talked about what it means to facilitate deep conversation.
Yeah.
And so we'll narrow down that at first, but I'd love your first thoughts that come to your mind as we're talking about this, just like what's immediately on your heart, and then we'll narrow it down a little bit later.
Yeah. So, thank you for that. And yeah, first of all, when I saw you put that out, I followed a bit of your work, heard you on other podcast, checked out your TikTok, had a flip through your book, and it's just amazing the things you're putting out there, right? Which you just gave a demonstration right now when you started preaching. It's just like your voice is one that is really, really, really much needed right now. So when I saw you put that out straight away, when I saw the line about what it means to be good news, it was kind of like a yes moment for me, because I've been having very similar conversations with those around me and those in my church community and in my family about, I'm heavily into my theology, and I love my theology. I love the nerdy thing. I'm actually, my story is a bit interesting because I was born and raised in a Pentecostal church, sort of like a Black African Pentecostal church. Grew up a little bit in the Four Square movement, but I'm now part of a Reformed church, which I know people online, like, for example, the crowd that follows me on Thread, constantly calling me names, a leftist and everything. They would find it very interesting if they actually came in and sat around my table. And so, like, the people that I interact with daily, because I am part of like a heavily like Dutch Reformed community, that's just another interesting thing. But within like sort of the Reformed community, as you will probably be aware, with a lot of the neo-Calvinist movement in the US, a lot of it's very deep about like theologies and dogmas and doctrines and all that stuff, and which I am a fan. Like I enjoy reading Calvin's Institutes. I have it on my shelf. Like I enjoyed going, it's a massive read, but I enjoy going through that. I enjoy looking at all that the reformers, whether it's Zwingli, Luther, all that the reformers had to offer and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, that is not the gospel. That is just theories about what was happening on the cross, what the atonement means, and what basically the idea behind what the gospel is. But that's not the gospel. The gospel, the announcement of good news, primarily, as N.T. Wright and a few other people put it, it's about a new king and a new kingdom. And what that means that we need to live out of that new king and a new kingdom. And I think about like just going back to the origins of the word euangelion, that at the crux of what the euangelion meant, it's that when one of the emperors had won a battle or whatever, it meant that the world was different now. There was a good news that was coming in place, that this king is one or this emperor is one, which means that where we live, things are about to change and things are about to look different. What we were doing yesterday, we probably won't be doing anymore, because there's a new order in town, baby. And I think that's primarily, when I think about the good news, that's what it means. If Jesus is Lord, then our lives need to showcase that. Our lives need to point to that. It's not just as you said, it's not just about having nice mega churches and nice worship concerts, but whilst we're treating the immigrants and strangers like rubbish, or whilst we're doing dodgy dealings, or whilst we're sacrificing our weakness for power. We can't say we're good news people if we're doing that. Being good news people means, as you were saying, self-sacrificially laying our lives down, self-sacrificially caring for those on the margins, self-sacrificially being in those places that nobody else would be listening to those voices that for so long have been pushed to the curbs. That's what it means, because if Jesus is truly Lord, then the powers that be are not. And I'm really starting to sound like anti right there. But if Jesus is Lord, then the powers that be, and we live in a world where we can see the powers like infiltrating with all the craziness that's happening this year, like with everything that's going on in every corner of the earth, because you hear a lot about what's happening in Europe and the Middle East, but my family hails from the Congo in Africa. So I'm pretty in tune with what's going on in African politics and the mess that's going on there as well. And then obviously with everything going on in the US, and just every other day there's something crazy. Like when you hear about all the craziness and what the powers are doing in the world, if we Christians are going to stand and say we're good news people, then we need to show that there's a different way of doing things around here that is consistent with the way of Jesus. And I think when I read that, that's really what stood out to me. And that's kind of why I felt like it was really timely. And I think I was like the second person to comment, because as soon as I saw that, I'm like, I need to comment. Like I need to jump on and just have a conversation about this, because I feel like this is something that is so timely, so needed in all corners of the earth.
I love that, and I'm really I'm excited because not only you, but I'll have Bo Stringer on as well, and we'll have a great conversation lined up as well. Before we get even deeper into talking practically about how to have and facilitate deep conversations. And let me be clear, I think specifically the reason why I really want to have these conversations is it's really easy for everyone to put out what's right and what's wrong in the church right now. It's really easy to say this isn't okay, this isn't right, whatever. But I think what a lot of people are not doing is they're not giving practical advice for people to do something about this. I have a big heart because I was a youth pastor for 13 something years, and I have a huge heart for young people, as there's so many influences everywhere that they go. You have a bunch of young people who want to be influencers and have their own YouTube channels, which is great, all the best for them. The problem is you have a lot of people who are not who aren't how do I put it? They're not, I was saying, I'm not going to say theologically educated, because I'm not a big stickler on I don't think you need a degree, for example, but I do think you need education, right? There's a difference between having a piece of paper that certifies that I've done this work and somebody who just put in the sweat ethic to just figure it out and do that stuff. And there's not a lot of people who are trying to influence young people with how to follow Jesus practically and to do what he did and what he desires for us. It's a lot of people who just want to say a lot of churchy things, help you to figure out how to manage your anxiety and how to be a good boyfriend and girlfriend that honors Jesus and and all these things. And then they want to slide in a brand deal or something. It's not a lot of people who are influencing them. No, we need bold, brave people, and let's teach you practically. I want every single person who tunes into these conversations to have the confidence to know that when they leave these conversations, they feel like they have something practical that's going to help them the next day to go wherever they are, wherever they may be, and they have the courage to do what no one else is willing to do. And as we get into that, I want to, especially from your perspective, coming over from Australia, is me being in America. A lot of Americans get their media, they get it censored or it gets propagandized or whatever. And I'd love to know you even talked about how you have a lot of ears over in the Congo, but obviously being in Australia, what is it from your perspective that you guys see that's not only necessarily going on here in America, but specifically what is going on around the world that people aren't paying attention to? And how do you feel like that is important for Christians to understand?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that with why it's gonna sound like tooting my own horn, But with why I think voices like my own are unique. I'm obviously a Black Australian, which is that in itself, it's, you don't see a Black Steve Irwin every day,
No.
that in itself, it's already quite unique. But then also being somebody that was born and raised in the faith, and although, like, as you were saying, like, I probably don't have fancy names in terms of like theological degrees to my name, but I am somebody that is pretty deep and steeped in the world of theology, and have been, like, I'm a self-professed Bible nerd. So I think why I'm saying all that is that I feel like when I'm looking at what's happening in American Christianity, particularly mainly with the evangelical church, but again, you have some mainline things going on in the mainline as well in North America. But when I look at sort of what's going on there, the thing for me that I think hurts me the most, it's knowing the influence that American Christianity has on the whole world and has had. And that's why I feel that even as an Aussie, I need to speak up about what's going on in the US, because Australia, we have a running joke that we always say, Australia is always like 2 years behind the US. So whatever's going on, like in the American church, the things that are going on in the American church, best believe they're going to find themselves trickle somehow into like the Australian church as well. We're not quite at the extent to where the US is, but in a lot of ways we are on the same trajectory. And there's a few different ways that I can pinpoint that. There is definitely a growing and I'm not trying to get too political, but there is definitely a growing like ultra right wing conservative movement brewing in Australia. Like we've always had. A lot of my brothers and sisters who I dearly love in my community are self-professed conservatives, who a lot of them are affiliated with various conservative parties. And that's great, a lot of lovely people. But there's definitely been in the last few years this like brewing ultra-right conservative groups and values, and really becoming loud and really starting to sway a larger proportion of the population, which is a bit concerning, because when people think about Australia, Sydney is like the largest capital of atheism in the world. Like there's a lot of atheists in Sydney. Like naturally, your average Australian's kind of probably very left-leaning and sort of like, but to see that there's this right-wing, ultra-conservative movement sort of brewing, that in itself is concerning. And bringing it back now from a Christian perspective, that to me haunts me, like exactly what I'm seeing happen in American Christianity, because I work with different people. My neighbors are different people, and a lot of them, particularly in Australia, there's not a lot of believers around. We did a census a few years ago, and the numbers were shockingly low in terms of the average churchgoer in Australia. So we're not a very religious country. And the reason why I say that haunts me, because for my next door neighbors, or the person that, the person I may see at the groceries, or my colleague, what they may think about Christianity is what they see MAGA doing, or what they see the ultra-right conservatives doing in this country. And for them, they're like, that is what the faith is about. That's what it means to be good news people. And that haunts me, because all of that is, and just to put it as stark as possible, it is utterly contradictory to what Jesus taught and what Jesus stood for. So the fact that is even passing itself as Christianity, in a lot of ways, when I think about it, it actually makes me feel sick. Because that is nothing. It is the total opposite of who Jesus was, what Jesus stood for, what Jesus taught his followers to stand for, and what the good news that Jesus was announcing was about. The good news about liberation, the good news about restoration and jubilee, and restoring sight to the blind, and supporting the poor. Like, all of what's going on with the ultra-right conservative groups and MAGA Christianity and all of that is just so opposite to that. And I feel like if the church stays quiet, then that's what's going to pass as this is what Christianity is all about. And the reason why I say that is because there are so many faithful believers all around like the world. Like, God always keeps his remnant, as we see in the Old Testament. Like, I believe all around the world, there are a lot of faithful believers going about really being the hands and feet of Jesus and really being the good news. But the issue is that a lot of these groups that have emerged over the last, well, in America, it's really over the last 50 years with the with what has been going on with the sort of the Republican Party and all that. But it's really the last 50 years. But a lot of these groups that have been brewing, they are very loud. So although you're a quiet Christian, just living a humble life and being the hand and feet of Jesus, these groups are so loud that they're what is passing for Christianity. And to me, I think that's what really concerns me a lot. And although it is like, as you're saying, in America, I'm not sure what's going on with the media there at the moment, because I see this online all the time. Here in Australia, we do have biases in our media. The media is the media, but our
Profits
media
off your outrage. So
Exactly. But we have way more outlets with different perspectives, and where you get more nuanced views. If you're somebody that is really after the truth of the matter and after fact, you are going to find it. It's so much easier to find here in Australia. But it's always interesting when I hop online, and it's the same. I'm not sure if you heard about the Bondi massacres, the horrific incident that happened in Australia in late December. It was basically, it's been dubbed a terrorist attack, but it was basically an anti-Semitic attack. And there was a brave Muslim man who fought one of the gunmen and basically got the gun off him. He got shot himself, but he survived and he's doing pretty well. But he was able to fight one of the gunmen and take the weapon off him. And I remember jumping online because I made a post about it. And I was like, as an Australian Christian man, I am today very proud of my fellow Islam brother who stood up and did something so great. And I wanted to put that post out because I was like, this is what it should be about. In this time where there is so much turmoil with, anti-Semitism and anti-Islam, it's really important that people of different faiths, we come together and we show that we can have different beliefs, but we can all come together within our common humanity, which I believe is actually the mandate for those who profess the name of Jesus. I remember posting that online, and I had Americans in my comment telling me that, oh, where did you get this information from? This was a Christian Syrian man. In my head, I'm just like, where are you guys getting this stuff from? I'm Australian. Like, this is all over our media. Like, this guy's family was on the news talking this morning. So where are you guys getting this information from that, quote unquote, that this is a Syrian Christian? But then as I went down the rabbit hole, I saw, there were some big right-wing pages sort of pushing that propaganda that this, and that just shows you how media in the US at the moment is twisting everything upside down, which for Australians, it leaves a lot of us dumbfounded because we're like, how can you not do a quick Google search and find the right information? But obviously, there's so many things that are being censored that it's really hard for people to find the right information. So they're just running with these narratives that have been pushed onto them by the higher ups.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so much we could talk about even with just that, but I don't want to get too off topic. You mentioned specifically how you feel like Australia is about 2 years behind in America, and you see the same trajectory that has happened here is starting to play out there. And I often notice, I think part of the reason for that is you have a lot of the same influencers, especially when in growing Christianity. So, I helped when I was living in Atlanta, I helped Hillsong plant one of their churches in Atlanta. Hillsong, obviously big in Australia. Everybody knows who Hillsong is in Australia. And
yes,
I think that while obviously I don't think Hillsong is somehow directly proportionate to that, I think that the commonality there is it's the growing issue of, not really the growing issue, the fruition. Oh, excuse me, Sebastian. Hi, Sebastian. Let's get down. Okay, you can say hi. And then He's a gorgeous cat, but he's nothing but air going on up there. He's just there to look pretty. Yeah, I think there's the fruition of what has happened through churches like Hillsong is what has made Christianity a brand. And it's made something that I've called spiritual consumerism. And I think as a result, and why I think that's such a dangerous thing, the spiritual consumerism, is it makes Christianity about entertainment. And in the midst of our entertainment, we stay numb. And when we say numb, I remember years ago, you talk about these more extremist right-wing Christians who are loud, and it's the noise. And I remember 10 years ago when all the same thing, everyone's being so loud. And we were told as Christians, when I was a young pastor, that to not get too political and add to the noise, that the idea of the Christian thing to do was to just kind of stay silent and just ignore it. And looking back, even back then, I knew how damaging that was, because it was damaging because we could stay silent, but the darkness is always working.
Yes.
They may be loud, but you know what? They're relentless. They're still gonna keep pushing, and because they're gonna keep pushing,
Yes.
they continue to make ground. And now, as they are getting what they want, and they're getting all this control, and we're still just expected to stay silent when we should have spoke up a long, long time ago. But to kind of shift it just a little bit, where have you found, especially as we move into this idea of facilitating deeper conversations, because that's why I think it matters most, right, is the conversations that we have with people, especially in a world where everyone wants to be loud and they want to draw the attention to themselves. There's a large, especially within these nationalistic ideologies that are taking over the church, it's rooted in supremacy. Most people think of supremacy as just like racial, but supremacy is more of just a conquering mindset. And it's really just it takes it all the way back to the 1500s. Like, these things have been going back since the Protestant Reformation and earlier than that. It goes all the way back to 800 AD when Charlemagne was crowned by Pope Leo III as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and this idea of conquest. That's where all of this boils down to. This is why, on one hand, I think some people want to brush it off because they've seen all this. They think this has all happened before, but the problem is that this has happened before, and the reason that this happened was not a godly one. It's because of people who are trying to, the Catholic Church had its term. It's time for the Protestant Church now to rise up and take over and do all this stuff and have this whole nationalistic worldwide control. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's all the same deception from the same source. The same source being the beast, or the enemy, the devil, however people want to phrase it. It's the same spiritual sickness that invades the hearts and minds of people who want to desire this earthly control, this earthly power, this earthly dominance. It's a supremacy mindset. And so in the midst of that, I think that both of us would agree that the best way to fight against that is to not, fight fire with fire, not to what am I forgetting? The eye for an eye. That's the phrase I was looking for. Not the eye for an eye. Yeah, we would both agree that the answer is not an eye for an eye, but instead to follow the teachings of Jesus. And instead of, when they want to use the sword, we instead would rely on the Spirit. When they would want to kill, when they want to take life, we would rather give life. And I think the best way to do that is in our conversations and how we talk to other people. So how is it that, in your experience, you've begun to foster intentional conversations, and what has that looked like for you? Have you found it to be successful? Have you found there's kind of like, not necessarily a method, but have you found that you are intentional with certain things and you find that it's working?
I think that's a great question, and just like you said, I think that's important to highlight. Although it's really important to be practical, that I find that on a few different conversations, and in particular with a lot of modern day sort of the evangelical community, we have so many different conversations about different things. But as you were saying, in particular for young people, there's nothing that's practical, and for me, a lot of that is in the sexual sort of discussion as well, which is why I love why Sheila Gregor and a lot of great voices are doing so many good work in that. But this is another good one in terms of how in a world like this where there are so many competing voices, so many screaming matches, everybody's fighting for their place on the algorithm, which is pretty much what's happening. You find yourself one day on one side of the algorithm, on the other day on the other side. How do you facilitate deep discussions? And for me, a few things, although I don't think there's a method to it, but I think there's practical steps that can be applied across the board for all believers. And one of my biggest things, it comes down to, this is actually was something that N.T. Wright has mentioned in his recent book, The Vision of Ephesians, where it's about the Christian community from the very beginning has always had to be a multicultural, multi-generational, diverse body. And the reason why I say that is only when you have diverse voices coming together and diverse perspectives will you be able to see your blind spot, but will you also be able to show your brother his blind spot or your sister their blind spot as well. And I think that for me,
say that one more time, because I think that's that's something that's worth repeating right there.
Yeah, I think it is really important to remember that from the very beginning, the Christian church has always had to be multi-generational, multicultural, and diverse, because it is only when we have different diverse voices are we able to have our own blind spots called out, and are we also able to call out the blind spots of our brothers and sisters. And in my walk, how that has looked, like I was mentioning before, I'm part of the Reformed community, and okay, I would say when it comes to my theology, I don't subscribe to a particular camp, because I just think that every theological camp has a lot of great things to offer to the church, but has some not so great things to offer to the church. And just that's kind of where I am in my journey. I think it's Dr. T. Mackey of the Bible Project say that if you're comfortable with your theology, don't read the Bible. Just don't read the Bible, because it's always going to poke holes. And I think that's where from the theologians that I've learned by, and the theologians that, like, for example, your N.T. Wright, your Scott McKnight, your Michael Heisers, that have been in the game for a long time. You can even see them saying that they're like, within my theology, like probably 10% of what I'm saying right now in the next 20 years might be wrong, because that's the thing about theology. And it kind of brings me back to our early discussion, speaking about like theories. These are theories, people trying to piece together the understanding of who God is, what God is up to, why Jesus came, and what Jesus has done. But I say that to say that I am still in the Reformed community. And the reason why I am, that I love it there. I am a racial minority in my community. And I love that because a lot of those brothers and sisters, I'm the first black person that they've ever sat down with and had a proper conversation. I remember in 2019 having a full-on debate. It was like me against like 4 guys talking about Trump. And they were genuinely listening, and they were pushing back, but for them it was like this was the first time that they heard a believer really push against what Trump stands for. And for them it was like, whoa. And then I would say some things and they're like, I've actually never considered that before. I've never thought about that before. And that's just one example. But in so many different ways, we've had that. Now, with that being said, the other reason why I think that being a part of a diverse community is important is, although with everything that's gone on with the ultra-conservative and right-wing, and it's so easy to jump online and see the craziness of what they're doing and slightly start to dehumanize them and even start to demonize them. And I think having brothers and sisters around me who, in a lot of ways, will identify with that camp, it always allows me to humanize them. I have family members who are for Trump, and having those discussions with them. So whenever I jump online and I'm debating someone from like the mega crowd or that, I'm able to see my uncle or auntie or brother or sister that also identifies with that camp, which still allows me to humanize them. Although I disagree with them, just like across the dinner table, the conversations that I have with my family, I'm very clear about my disagreements and why it is wrong and why I think morally, but I think biblically it's wrong. I'll be very clear about that, but I'll still humanize them and I'll still love them and I'll still have the conversation in a way that is not condescending, in a way that is honoring the image bearingness. And I think that, and then I take that on social media as well. Whenever I'm communicating with a person, knowing that this is a person with a family, who is created in the image of God, who is loved by Jesus, and I need to treat them likewise. So I think that's the importance of having a diverse community. And I think I'm going a step further as well. For those that may say, they're in a place where they don't necessarily have access to a diverse community, just maybe where they live, where they're located, they don't have access to necessarily a diverse community. Seek out voices, read more. Read people that you wouldn't generally read. And in my own life and in my own walk, that is something that has really changed the game for me, being very widely read. Reading from, for example, I always tell people like reading the books of Rachel Held Evans, the late Rachel Held Evans, just opened my eyes to even how I engage with Christian LGBTQI plus folks. Like just hearing through her books, she was really the introduction that I was like, oh, wait, there's actually a community here that has something to say and that maybe the church should listen. And listening to other voices, like I said, I even engage with some of the reformers, even some of the neo-Calvinist reformers who, in a lot of ways, everything else that they'll say, and I'm talking about your Johnny Macs, your Barry Balcombs, your Pipers, a lot of other things that they would say I probably disagree with, but it's still important that I engage with them so that if I'm having that discussion with somebody else, I'm able to represent their position clearly. And I think listening to different perspectives, listening to different voices, and being honest as well, representing voices to the best of your ability. I know sometimes naturally all humans, we do carry biases and sometimes we just may not listen to the person as best as we possibly could, but always going into conversations with that humility. I want to represent this person's position as best as possible, really understand it, and then try to link it up with what scripture is saying, try to link it up with what other voices are saying, and see if this is really adding up. And I think those are probably some of my very practical ways. I think community, I think that's pretty much what I've been saying. Community is so important, but reading widely, podcasts, if you're not an avid reader, there are so many podcasts out there with different diverse voices. Listen to the diverse voices. Listen to Charlie Kirk. Go and listen to Charlie Kirk and then go listen to April Ajoy. Like listen to the different voices and what they're saying, and then from that start to bring things together.
Yeah, I know they're capping, but I get it by the capping. They're always chasing dollars, damn stacking, but it's slacking. I see them running off the goals, I try to tell them stop. If you ain't got the spirit, yeah, you're missing from the top of money, pride fades. So please don't get me twisted, my wealth is in the kingdom, that's where it's been encrypted. They keep flexing up on Instagram, showing off the cheddar, but when death's knocking at the door, they cloud to make it better. Look, Jesus that he rose again, he paid my price. Them flexing up on Instagram will never get the hype. Homie, open up your eyes, don't listen to the lies. Money don't bring your roots, only Christ bring the truth. But regardless,
I think for those who will be listening to this episode, so far we've come away with several different things. If someone comes up to us and they would say, "Hey, I want to learn how to be good news by facilitating deep conversation." So far, through what you've already shared, the first thing is to diversify. Diversify your knowledge, diversify your community, diversify the people you surround yourself with and the knowledge that you're taking in. And also when you're facilitating good conversation, I think they seamlessly kind of go hand in hand, is make sure that you are speaking the other person's language. Make sure that when that person is listening to you, they know that you fully understand their position. That you know what they're trying to get. You know the language they're trying to speak. You know what their goals are. And then I would add this third one in here as well, is to ask good questions. Bring it back to simple questions. For example, let's say we have this imaginary scenario, and we got this guy named, we'll say his name's, I don't know, I'll say Greg. Sorry if your name's Greg and you're listening, but
Shout out to all the Gregs.
So let's say Greg is a guy I want to have a really intentional conversation with, because I think there are things that he holds on to that's currently holding him back from following Jesus the way Jesus desires for him. Rather, the things that he believes is actually leading him down the path that's enabling the very things that Jesus preached against. And I want to have an intentional conversation with Greg. I want to make sure that when it comes down to diversifying our audience, all these things we've taken into consideration, I'd ask a very simple question, and I would bring it down to two questions. I would say, what is it that you're hoping for in the long run? Like, what is it that that you think this will lead up to? And then break it down with this very simple question. Do you think that's what Jesus actually wanted? Now they will probably say, well, yeah, Jesus said, and you listen to their response and then say, show it to me. Show it to me where Jesus says this is what he desires. And everything that we're supposed to be we're bringing it back to the words of Jesus. And if you can't bring it back to the very simple words of Jesus, not even taking Jesus' words out of context, this is another thing, is always bring it back to what was most important to Jesus. If it doesn't bring it back down to loving God and loving people, and that's the filter through everything else, and then you bring his words and you filter it through those words, if you can't do that, then you can that's your anchor point that you can bring people back to. Now, if somebody says, I don't care about Jesus, well, then we can have a whole different conversation about that. But when it comes to being good news, especially in a world where unfortunately, our number one opponents are Christians themselves, it's important that you just have to ground people in what is it that you desire. What do you think you're accomplishing this? And is it actually what Jesus wanted? So to recap, to kind of go over three things, if someone's listening, it's diversify your content, diversify your community, and ask really good questions. Because that's what we got so far. So what would you add to that?
I think that summary was spot on, perfect. And I love how you added asking good questions. There's actually a great book by Marty Solomon, who runs the Be My podcast. And it's asking better questions of the Bible. And I'll use that to translate that exactly to what you're saying, because he was just showing, with mainly coming from a fundamentalist sort of background, we're taught to never question the Bible. The Bible is the word of God and that sort of view. But actually the way scripture is designed and the way the Eastern perspective of reading scripture it's through questions that you actually unearth the treasures, which is why Jesus always taught in parables, so that people could do the work of really getting to the meaning of what he was saying. But I'll bring that straight into this discussion, even when engaging with the culture, even when engaging with what it means to be good news in this world. The questions that we ask are really good. Asking questions. And the thing is, the age-old saying that there is no such thing as a wrong or bad question. Every question, it shows an indication that you want to gain a further insight and greater knowledge. And I think, as you said, like asking good questions, finding questions that you'll ask that are pivotal to bring you back to how well does this align with the way of Jesus? How well does this align with the greatest command, loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself? And within that, how does it mean to flush this out or to live this out? And another reason why I think that's important is also because there are a lot of things that are black and white, but there are a lot of things that are gray in our world. For example, how we vote. And this might delve into a bit of a rabbit hole, because I have an article that I wrote on Substack about this, shameless plug, that if you want further insight, you can go and read that. But it was just about the idea of centrism and like trying to be in the center. I'm not left, I'm not right, I just want to be in the center. And I just have to give that caveat, because I've heard a lot of people in the evangelical world and in the broader Christian world say about voting. In terms of voting, you have one side that's like, if you don't vote Republican, you're not a Christian. And then you have the other side that says that the Bible doesn't really say anything about voting, so it doesn't really matter. Whoever you vote for, it doesn't really matter, as long as, you're just voting or whatnot, it doesn't really matter. But I will say there's a more nuanced position that is different to both of those, because on one hand, it's obviously like a right-wing idea where you need to just vote Republican. And on the other hand, it's more of like a centrist idea of it doesn't really matter who you vote for because all the candidates suck. They all know Jesus, so it doesn't really matter. But then I feel like there's a more nuanced perspective. And the reason why I say a nuanced perspective is that obviously my allegiance is not to any party. My allegiance is to King Jesus, who is above all parties, who trumps all parties, pun intended. Who's above all parties. That's who my allegiance is for. But under that allegiance to Jesus, who, when I look at their policies, when I look at how they're treating those that Jesus continually tells us how to treat them, who is treating them more like Jesus would have us to do? And I think that's where questions become really important, because for the longest part, it has just been the question that a lot of people have had: what is their stance on abortion? Oh, okay, that box is ticked. Forget everything else. Forget their immigration policies. Forget how they treat people of color. Forget how they treat women. Forget about all of that. Forget about their character and their moral record. Forget about all of that. What is their stance on abortion? And to me, that is not the right question. And
outside of the fact that it's also rooted in just pure political manipulation. Like the idea that we have filtered abortion as the deciding factor of who I should vote for or who is the God-centered party is purely political manipulation from the Reagan era politics. Like it's a hard thing for people, especially an older generation, to grasp, because they spent so much time being both fear-mongered and propagandized into this. It has a whole other long rabbit trail. I think Holy Post Media does a really good podcast on explaining that. If you don't know who that is, that's the guy who did Veggie Tales, and he has his own podcast, and it's really, really good. Sorry, go on.
That is spot on, because again, if you go deep enough, you will see that this is where, in particular with the moral right in America, you will see that they went from being all about racial segregation to abortion became the thing, and that in itself is a rabbit hole. But exactly, if we're just asking the question of what is their stance on abortion and ignoring all these other things, we're not asking the right questions, which if we're not asking the right questions, it's going to lead us to the wrong conclusions. And I think that is for the major part, as you just summarized, what is happening, because for so long, for the last, I don't know how many years, we've been so focused on this one particular issue that we've neglected all the others, that it has resulted in the church really selling out its weakness, because we're just trying to put up this one point. Oh, they're against abortion, which that in itself at this point has also, by a lot of the right in America, has seemed to be pushed under the rug, because a lot of their favorite candidates have also flipped on that particular point. So now it's like, oh yeah, forget about that. We will move on to, there are other things. But it just shows you that when we don't ask the right questions, we come to the wrong conclusions. And then I think just piggybacking off of that, another big thing that I will say is that getting better theological insight. And this is not saying about becoming more theological nerdy, but getting better theological insight, listening. It kind of comes back to listening to diverse voices, but listening to the witness of people like the Black church, listening to the Global South. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Josh P. Thomas's work.
He recently wrote
he's a great
book on
great guy. I love Josh. He and
I,
he's a acquaintance. I mean, we just know each other via social media, but he's a great guy, does great work. His book, The Justice of Jesus, is I haven't read it yet, but it's on my shelf and I have to read it.
It's incredible. I devoured it in like a week. It is just that, it is incredible. But that's what I was about to allude to, because he shows that if we listen to a lot of believers from the Global South, a lot of these things that most of us in the US, but I'll even put Australia right in there, that are being so concerned about believers in the global South. When you're thinking about, for example, in places where you don't know where your next meal's coming from, in places where you're literally being persecuted, not somebody saying Merry Xmas at Starbucks, but you're actually being persecuted, where you're actually going to lose your life for the faith. A lot of these conversations that we're having, for them, they're like, what is going on with you guys? Like, you've forgotten what Jesus was actually about. And you guys are just having these conversations. And that's why I would say getting better theological insights, listening to those voices who have stood the test of time. And that's why I really would plug in the Black church. Folks like Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr., their writings have stood the test of time. It was MLK Day just a few days ago in the US. And it's just showing how what MLK was talking about, for example, in the letters from Birmingham jail, literally you could think he wrote that just a week ago with everything that's currently happening in the US. Like, it has stood the test of time. So listening to those theological voices as well, and seeing how they plug in to the biblical prophets, they plug in to the gospel writers, and showcase how we can be good news in the current contemporary world. So I think that's the other thing I'll add as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Can you think of a specific time when you have facilitated a deep conversation with someone and you feel like it actually went exactly as you were hoping for?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a conversation that I will sort of bring up, it was during the Black Lives Matter sort of things going on in 2020. And I'm a pretty young guy. I'm in my mid-20s at the moment. So I was pretty young. I was just in probably my late teens back then, which is shameless plug. When I jump online and I'm talking about a lot of these things, and people are like, what's going on? Like, who's brainwashed you? And it's funny because I was talking about these similar things in my teens, like as a late teen. But I remember talking to a brother during like the Black Lives Matter movement. He was a white brother from a more sort of conservative side of stuff, and he just couldn't understand why people were going nuts in the street. Why people have had it, why people weren't, why people were basically cussing out law enforcement and all this. And he's like, haven't you read Romans 13? Like, how we need to obey authorities and stuff. And I will give him props because he displayed a lot of humility in that conversation as well, because he did take out the time to hear me out. But I remember meeting him where he was. We did go through Romans 13, sort of starting there. And it's like, so what is Paul talking about in Romans 13? And what does Paul? And it's really interesting because Paul says in Romans 13 that if people are basically doing the right thing, they shouldn't be fearing the sword, because he says that God has put people in authority to basically keep people intact through the sword, which means that if people are doing the right thing, are going about their business, doing the right thing, they shouldn't be living out of fear of the sword, which straight away in regards to policing in the US and the history of policing in the US, that using Romans 13 just collapses, because a lot of dark-skinned folks, and I have family in the US in Texas, and having conversations with them, how it feels to be a colored person in the US and how they think about law enforcement, and hearing their stories, it is terrifying. It's like Romans 13, because they're doing the right thing, but as soon as a car pulls up, they're frightened for their life. Although they're in the right, they're doing the right things, they gave them the license, they're still frightened for their life. So I remember going with this brother, starting from there, but then from there starting to look at the statistics, showing literally the research that was done a few years, it might be maybe 10 years old now, but about when cops stop people of color versus stop Caucasians in the US, and how that sort of looked like, and then obviously deaths in police custody and so forth. And then I remember also another thing I presented was Christian voices, Black Christian voices, Esau McCaulley, and a lot of other great Black American Christian voices who are speaking about the same thing. These are God-fearing men who love the Lord, who love their family, who are not gang affiliated, who are going about their day, and the treatment that they've had from law enforcement. And I'm like, so this is not just, it's not one bad apple. We're talking about, this is a systemic thing that has been going on for far too long. We can go all the way to the 1992 riots in LA. We can go even further than that. And then you go to the history of where all this began with how people of color were being treated in the civil rights movement and back then. But anyway, so sort of gave him all that, and he displayed a lot of humility, but he really at the end of it was like, I've never sort of considered all that before. But I think why, as I reflect why that went well, it was one, when I came into it, and I'll be very careful saying this, because this is something that I do believe that those who have been marginalized and oppressed, we always tell them that they need to hold their feelings intact, that they need to be controlled. And no, sometimes righteous anger is a thing. Like when people have been oppressed for so long, their only healthy response sometimes, it is anger. But I think if you can be in a place where you're supposed to have that conversation, coming in from a place of, I hear what you're saying, but can you hear me out? And I think that's where it sort of started, meeting them where they were with Romans 13, sort of starting there, and then going through the statistics, and then to still make them sort of feel comfortable, showing them that you're very brothers and sisters in the faith. Men who are godly men, who are doing incredible work in the kingdom, who are being good news day in and day out, they're still getting treated like this by law enforcement. And I think just his response from that was like, wow. And we've had a lot of different conversations after that, but it's really seeing his perspective just change on this whole thing, where some people will call him a social justice warrior now, because he's almost on the other side where he's like, he sends me stuff and he's like, look at what's happening. Look what's going on. What's currently going on with the administration in the US. And another good example that I've done, this wasn't me facilitating a conversation, but this was me sort of wanting to learn. And this is what I'll plead with anybody listening to do. Whenever something happens that you're not most equipped to be the man, as you were saying, supremacy, a lot of us, particularly Christians, we think since the Bible is the word of God and since it is the truth, we believe that naturally since we're Bible people, then we don't need to listen to anybody else's voice. We need to be the ultimate authority on everything that happens in the globe, and mainly as well, you know, the white male ideal of I need to be the ultimate authority on everything. I would just remind us that having that humility, and I say that because when sort of the Gaza-Israel thing started in late 2023 in October, I remember my first response was I jumped on Wikipedia and I jumped online and looked at a few articles, and Manthur Isaac, who's doing amazing stuff, got into his book. But I had a brother around who's a Middle Eastern brother who knew sort of the Middle East history really well. And I remember my first thing was I reached out to him. I was like, I have no idea what's going on, brother. Please give me as much information as you can. I want to hear it from your perspective. And then because I heard his perspective, and then I have a few Jewish people in my life as well that I trust. I reached out to them as well. I was like, I have no idea on this. I want to hear your perspectives on this. And that allowed me, so when I was having this conversation with my family, because through that, it actually equipped me where I felt that I was comfortable enough to educate other people on what was going on, because I got pretty much bombarded from both sides with information, where I was like, I feel comfortable now sharing this information and relaying it onto other people. So that's something else that I will encourage our brothers and sisters, that hear people out first. Remember that they're the experts, in particular, if they're from a particular group, that they're experiencing this. Listen to them first. Don't just go to what your favorite right-wing influencer or what your favorite Christian influencer is saying, because they're not the ultimate authority on this particular topic. Listen to the people on the ground. Listen to the people who have been studying this for years and years. And I will even say the same thing with our atheist and agnostic brothers. I see this all the time on the internet, where we're so quick to argue with them prior to listening to their concern, to what they actually have to say. Listen to their voices first. Listen to what they have to say. Take it in, and then form an opinion.
I love that. I think that's really good. I think one of the things that I hear echoed a lot in what you were saying is to make sure that when in doubt, listen to someone's story.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, listen to someone's story, and don't look at somebody talking about the situation. Listen to somebody who is in that situation, because their perspective is going to matter more than anything else. I think that makes even more sense when we look at the things that are going on today. It's like, don't listen to the news about what's happening in Minneapolis and here in America. Go and call your friends who live in Minneapolis, who are there. What are they saying? If you want to listen to them, because no one can deny what you've seen with your own eyes and what you've heard with your own ears. And then listening to that information, you can then begin to sort it out for yourself. I posted this the other day, and it was one of those things that I was like, a lot of times I'll post a lot of stuff, and sometimes it may not get a lot of traction because it just doesn't show up on the feed. Almost always, if I post anything remotely political, it'll tend to like blow up a little bit more. So this is one of those things that I really thought was going to blow up, but it really didn't get much traction, which I'm fine with. I didn't post it to get traction. It was just, I tend to like use threads, just like things that I post, random thoughts that I'm actually going to add to books later, but I want to like write down the thought right now so I don't forget it. And so I just like blurb stuff out there. But one of the things that I said was that, that you can measure the amount of privilege that you have by how much your life is affected by government's decisions. So I used like myself as an example. Despite my beautiful brown skin complexion, I'm actually half Puerto Rican, and so I'm actually half Puerto Rican. Despite my mother's side, and outside of not even looking Hispanic at all, I look like I'm a white guy. I'm married. I'm straight. I'm a dad. I was a pastor. For the lack of better words, my life is relatively unaffected by decisions that the government makes. And therefore I have a lot of privilege. There are a lot of people who don't have that, though. There's a lot of people, every decision the government makes affects their lives drastically. And I think that's where a lot of people don't recognize when they have privilege or don't have privilege. And I think that's important for people to realize, because when the decisions that are being made aren't directly affecting your life, it's so easy to ignore it. But privilege is a responsibility. At least that's how I see it. I see it as, because I have a lot of privilege, I have a lot of responsibility to be a good steward of that. With Spider-Man, with great power comes with great responsibility. Whatever. But I see it as my responsibility to utilize whatever resources I have to speak up for those who don't, because oftentimes it's very easy to take to use a harsher word, to use the sinful path and take my privilege and use it to make my life more comfortable. And that's what a lot of people do. They tune out the noise, right? Just don't listen to the media. Just turn off the news. Great. That's great that you can do that, but some people don't have that luxury, because every decision that's being made is the difference between life and death for somebody else. But we just aren't going to know that unless we listen to other people's stories and we listen to what it is that they have to say. And and if that's uncomfortable for you, you better buckle up, because guess who is listening? Jesus. God is listening to their prayers. And if you really want to be in tune with the Spirit of God, you also have to be willing to listen to the prayers of others as well. You have to be willing to listen to the cries of those who are suffering, because God has to hear their cries. And if you can't handle that, then you have to pray even more, because if you really want to follow Jesus, you have to follow him into death and life. And that means part of death is listening to the suffering of others, because it is supposed to stir you up to do something about it. And so for the practicality of it, to kind of bring it all in again, is if you want to facilitate really deep conversation, you have to diversify. You have to diversify your knowledge, diversify your community. You have to ask really good questions, and then as we get into this next part, it's listen to people's stories. It's
Yeah.
listening to people's stories. And where I want to kind of shift a little bit more with that, I want to make sure I keep track of it. I don't want to get
Yeah.
too off base here, but is where I want to go with that is, something that you said, you talked about earlier, is if you're facilitating a deep conversation, is how to keep your composure, because you don't want to be the guy who loses their cool. Right. You don't want to, I don't know why I just thought of this, totally random, but my daughter, she's, as your son grows, my daughter's 1 year old as of a few days ago.
Oh, that's
and, it's so funny how much her personality grows. Like, get ready, because like you'll have so much fun watching your son. Like, you get to fall in love with a new little kid every day because their personality begins to grow. But my daughter, bless her heart, is already sassy as all get out. Like, she has like you'll be able to tell. Like, you can tell what they're trying to say or what they mean without even trying. Like, girl the other day was losing it over the fact that she couldn't have an ice cube. Like, she loves like these. We have this like little ice machine that has like the little like this really like easy, soft, chewable, crunchy ice. It's great. And just a little ice machine. And she just all the time she's like, and she wants it. And so she wouldn't have ice a lot, and just crying, the saddest face you ever saw, and then just like had this real big and then like you could tell that like what she was trying to say was like, almost lost my cool there, guys.
Keep my composure.
And I just think of those moments where I'm like, how do you keep your composure when you're, because I'm horrible at this. So I'm mainly asking for myself, because I'm the worst. I'm a very emotional person. That's, my daughter gets all those emotions from me. I'm a very emotional, very passionate person. I get, when you're having hard conversations with people and you're trying to get them to just like, you want to just like shake them in the face, like, do you not see what's happening? I mean, like, what do you tell yourself when you find yourself starting to get that anger or that frustration or lack of patience is rising up? Have you done anything successful? I'm still trying to figure it out, but have you been at any success at being able to just like keep that composure, keep your cool, and control that kind of conversation? Have you been able to do that successfully? Because I haven't.
And the honest answer, just like you, not really, because just like yourself, I am a pretty passionate person about the things that I'm passionate sort of about, and the things that I think God cares about deeply. Like, I love the stuff we're talking about here. I even get more passionate where holy zeal, some would say. But with that said, something that in my life I've sort of had to do, and this is where, I praise God for having a good marriage and having a marriage where there is no power imbalances. My wife always feels, at any time, she feels comfortable to check me on anything. And it's vice versa, where there are no power imbalances. That's always been great, because when I do get passionate about things, I may have a conversation, I may say something harshly or rashly the way I shouldn't have, she'll check me on that later. And that's always a good time for reflection. Is okay, next time if this conversation comes up, I'll react differently, because there are times, I always tell people I'm a loud learner as well. So if I'm learning about something, or if I'm coming across a new concept, or I've dug deep, I blame it on, I think I'm undiagnosed ADHD. So I always blame it on like the ADHD. I just have seasons where I might get obsessed with something. I remember there was a few seasons back where I just took a deep dive into like Australian history and some of the systematic things that were going on there, and that's all I wanted to chew everybody's ear off about. But it's just sometimes when I am learning about something and I'm super passionate about it, because I'm still piecing it in my head, the way I might come across it when I'm having those deeper conversations might be a bit overbearing, or might be a bit more aggressive, or not necessarily Christ-like, and my wife lovingly will check me in on that. And in moments now where I find myself, because I have found myself in conversations where this conversation is not going anywhere, or it's not, and in times like that, I try not to shut down, because I find that might make it a bit awkward. In times like that, I'll sort of try to pull back either, and this is just from my personality, I'm not sure if this would work everyone, either try to make a joke to keep things a bit more lightheaded, or maybe take things in a different direction. And there are times, and the other thing I'll say as well, Jesus tells us in the Gospels to be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. And I think going into some of these conversations sometimes it's really wise to read the room. Like, to read the room going into it, because there are some conversations where I've went into it and they want to tell me how much they love Trump. And we're sort of having dinner with my wife. We're getting to meet this family for the first time. And I'm like, this is not the place or time. If we meet in a different setting or in a different place, or maybe when I get to know you a bit more, I'll be comfortable to have this conversation with you. And I can usually tell my wife, because she will have this little smirk when they're telling me about this. In her head, she's like, only if they knew what he wants to say right now. But he's just sort of bottling it in. So I'll say it's just being wise in the setting as well, because the thing that we want to do at all times, and the calling, as you were saying, that self-sacrificial love, is to love and honor the human dignity of every person, even when they're in the wrong, because that's what Jesus does for us time and time again. He sees all of our foolishness when we still have everything backwards, and he still loves us and he's still patient with us. Not that he agrees with our nonsense, but he still loves us, and we just need to have that for others. It is hard, and I think even the answers I get, there's nothing substantial. This is just some things that I've been trialing. So it is a really hard thing to do, in particular when it is topics like this where people are really suffering and people are really hurting. It is very easy to get passionate and let your emotions run over, but that's where, again, as we were saying, that self-sacrificial love, where remember, even this human being who may have their politics and everything backwards is still loved by Jesus. And the other big thing, coming back to the idea of the powers, Ephesians 6, we need to remember that people that may be MAGA, or people that may be ultra-right conservatives, or people that may be whatever, they're not our enemies. Our enemies is the darkness and evil that is lurking around trying to destroy human life. That is our enemy. And sometimes these people and these governments may be puppets of that. So we need to stand against it. But they're not our enemies, because they're still human beings loved by God. And I think that is also really important to just have in our back of our minds whenever we go into these conversations.
The spirit moves hearts, ain't no one change but some rules. And your worship of nostalgia, take it back to the 50s. Cause the kingdom wants a culture, every nation been redeemed. From Palestine to Perth, man, the mission don't pause. Our God ain't American, and Christ is Lord of all. Let's go!
One of the things that's been helping me more as I've become more comfortable with the kinds of conversations I want to have with people is remembering, like you said with Ephesians chapter 6, like we don't fight against flesh and blood, but we fight against, principalities, all that, spiritual forces. It's helped me to remember that the people that I'm having conversations with, they've been deceived. And that's a really helpful perspective for me, because it's like a lot of times you're not dealing with someone who is malicious, right? You're not dealing with someone who is evil. The truly evil people are fewer than what you think, because they're the ones who have been given authority on earth, power, greed, all the money. Your average person, your neighbor, the average person who's not a multi-billionaire who's lobbying to make your life worse so that they can be richer, they're not your enemy. They've just been deceived. And in that scenario, it makes you almost take pity, if anything, or compassion. How's you help? I guess that's a nicer word than pity, but it helps you to have more compassion. And that changes the perspective. You're not talking to somebody who is plotting against you. You're talking about someone who's lost. Yeah. They're lost. And
Yeah.
I think, and I think that's helpful because it changes what it means to lead someone to the light when you know that they're lost. When someone's lost and they don't know where to go, they're gonna be frantic. Everyone's gonna react differently to literally being lost. Like you're in the woods and you're in the dark and you're lost. And one person says they know that, everyone's gonna react differently to what that's like. And it may change how you lead that person. Another thing that's been helping me is to bring it to reality. I was talking to somebody the other day. We were having a deep conversation about all this stuff. And I had to like say up front before we started our conversation to say like, listen, I know for you, because, I do my best not to like insult them by saying they're privileged. So I try to find better ways to word it. But I'm like, I'm like, at the end of the day, I know that's because he's a privileged white guy who doesn't really have many problems. Like,
white blessing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, but I try to find a nicer way to say it. And so I was just telling like, listen, like, I know for you, these are kind of just nothing more than ideas. These aren't really affecting your life. But I'm talking because I have friends who it is affecting. I have friends whose lives are actually in danger. This is not this is not playtime for them. This is not just like sitting around a coffee table having, oh my God, this is a fun conversation. Like this is like people are actually being hurt. Friends of mine are actually in danger. People are actually suffering. Evil is actually happening. And for me, that's what makes it, this is a much more personal conversation and why it's more important for me that you see the truth. And I kind of put that as kind of like a disclaimer because it helps someone understand why you may be so passionate about this, because there's real people who are really being hurt. There are real people, real problems. This is real life. And a lot of times we've been so desensitized by a spiritual consumeristic culture where really at the end of the day, like I think of like even family and friends who are just oblivious or supportive of all this stuff and they want to quote unquote own the libs, and the only reason that the only thing, going back to my one of my posts earlier where I said that privilege is defined by how much the government's decisions change your life or not. The only thing that's really changed their life and has motivated them to own the libs is because their TV channels and their movies were a little bit more uncomfortable. That's like really it all comes down to. Like your life really hasn't changed except for the fact that maybe you didn't like the fact that there was a gay person on a movie. Like that's at the end of the day, that's all that's really changed. And for some people, that's all it's been. But it's important when that is all it's been because they spend their entire life in isolation. Isolation is where manipulation grows. When we spend our lives in isolation is where ideas and all this stuff brews. And the best way that you can counter that is with community. That's why college, this is why you have a lot of right-wing extremists who are so anti-college and they're anti-education and they're anti these things, because they know that when you are in community with other people, all of these lies that you were believing in isolation fall apart. It comes to light, literally comes to light. All of these lies that were in the dark come to light and they get exposed. And then you really have to make decisions about what you believe and what you don't believe. You can either cling to the lie or you can renegotiate with what you think is right or what is wrong or what you may have previously thought. And so when you're dealing with these people, it's remembering that they are deceived. And the reason they've been deceived is because they've been isolated. And in their isolation, and often this is how cults really function. Cults function because they're communities that are bred. They're isolated communities where you don't actually listen to outside voices. You're only listening to one voice in a little community. That's how these cults form. And so in the same way, they're deceived because they've been in isolation. And so the best thing that you can do for that scenario is you bring them in. You bring them into the fold. You bring them into community because it's something actually I wrote in my first book that I published, Simply Love Jesus. And I wrote that people are attracted to what they're missing out on. And when you help people realize they're missing out on something, if they don't have the truth that you have learned through Christ, the truth of all of these things that make us want to speak out and all this stuff, that you realize they're missing out on something, and you bring them into that community. And that's when you get to begin to have really tough conversations. So to bring it all to a close, and help me if I've forgotten anything, when you want to facilitate deep conversations, you have to start by first diversifying your knowledge, diversify your community. You want to ask really good questions. You want to listen to their story. And I guess this last one would be, how would I summarize the last thing that we've really talked about?
I'm thinking as well, just trying to pull it all together. It would be sort of knowing that the person in front of you, having compassion for them, knowing that they've been deceived.
I guess just have compassion. There's the last thing is have compassion. Have compassion. Know where they're coming from. And it would be, so bring it out close would be, diversify your knowledge, diversify your community, ask really good questions, and have compassion. Or listen to their story, but that's part of have compassion. So I guess we'll just put that one. Man, before we let you go, and thank you again for these great conversation. I mean, I'll definitely bring you back again at some point. We'll talk about just random stuff. But before I let you go, man, two things I would love from you. One is, where can people tune into your stuff? Like what is most on your heart right now that can be good news to you for other listeners to plug into? What are you passionate about right now that you want listeners to tune into?
I obviously make music, and I started making music for this very reason. A lot of people make Christian music. The Christian rapper Lecrae says that some people make music for the church, some people make music from the church. And what I have done, it's a bit of a hybrid. I got back into making music because I had a lot of things on my chest to say about the church. And that's basically since 6 years ago. And that's sort of and I'm still sort of doing that. Putting out things, so you can find my music. And a lot of it is good. I really love making good music, and I love hip hop, the art form, but a lot of it is, there's a really deep message, and a lot of it is very prophetic, just calling out a lot of nonsense that I tend to see within the church. So there is that, but the Lord has really helped in the last few years with Threads. For me, has become that platform, which is literally why I got into music. Was I had so many things on my chest that I wanted to get off, and the Lord has blessed me with Threads, which has really become where I've really become vocal. And I'm really vocal, and it's almost as if the more I'm continuing to grow, the less fear I'm getting, because at first there was a lot of fear. I had to really think, am I really comfortable putting this? But I'm at a place now, if Jesus approves it, if Jesus approves of what I'm going to say, and if my wife's happy, I'm going to post it. So those are sort of the two things that I do now. So that's a platform that I've met a lot of good people such as yourself, Caleb. So that's where you can really find me. I write a bit on Substack as well. I have a few articles that I've been putting up on there, and I'm hoping to do a bit more, just sort of provide more of my perspective. As I said, I think my perspective is unique, and it's probably one that is hopefully needed in the church at the moment. So I'm just hoping to use that a bit more to steward that as well as the Lord would want me. So those are mainly the two things. Go check out the music, and if you're not following me on Threads, follow me and check out what I have to say on there.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, it'd be for Threads and social media, it's Ortinel _G, and then on Spotify, Ortinel G. So without the underscore.
Without the underscore.
Without the underscore. I love that. And then the second thing I'd love for you, man, is give the listeners just, I guess, either some good news, or if you could just give them something practical, not even practical, but if you could just give listeners just a word, whatever that may look like for you. What's the kind of word you would want people to know?
That's a really great question. I just finished listening to a book, an audio book known as The Story of the Trinity, which is by Brian Lifton, and he basically just goes over like basically the Nicene Creed and how we got the doctrine of the Trinity and stuff. But his last chapter was phenomenal, how he finished it, quoting Karl Barth, and he says that he basically, the last words are that God didn't want to live without humanity. So God himself becomes human. And I think that is really important to remember God's commitment to humanity. We're living in a very interesting time of human history. Generally, I have a newborn, so I'm constantly asking like the craziness of me raising my child in this world at the moment, because it's a very crazy time, but it's just hopeful remembering that God is so committed to humanity that he became one of us, that Jesus, who is part of the Godhead, is a human. Like it is quite crazy when you think about it. So just remembering that God knows where we're coming from. God knows what it means to be oppressed, because Jesus was born in a very oppressive time, that Jesus underwent injustice himself. God knows what it means to be oppressed. God knows what it means to live for fear of your life. The last 24 hours of Jesus's life was one of a lot of fear and just a lot of uncertainty as well. So just knowing that. And then I would also want to connect that with, due to God's commitment for humanity, God always uses a group of people to continue to remind everybody else that God's still committed to them. And I think about this, my favorite verse in the Bible is Genesis 12 verse 3, where God tells Abraham that through your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Because I think that summarizes biblical theology right there. That's the whole storyline of the Bible. God always picks a group of people so that he can bless the whole world. And God is calling the church at the moment for us to wake up and follow Jesus, so that this world that there is so much darkness and uncertainty, they may get the light of God and know about the love of God, know about the commitment of God. So yeah, I think remember that God is still committed to humanity, no matter all the craziness that we see. And that's why God wants the church to wake up, so that the world can see that.
Yeah, I know they're capping, but I get it while they're capping. They're always chasing dollars, damn stacking, but it's lacking. I see them running after goals, I try to tell them stop. If you ain't got the spirit, yeah, you're missing from the top of money, pride fades. So please don't get me twisted, my wealth is in the kingdom, that's where it's been encrypted. They keep flexing up on Instagram, showing off the cheddar, but when death's knocking at the door, they clout to make it better. Look, Jesus died, he rose again, he paying my price. Damn, flexing up on Instagram will never get the hype. Homie, open up your eyes, don't listen to the lies. Money don't bring your roots, only Christ bring the truth. But regardless, they wanna cash it anyway. They said money's all them folks really care. But I found a living truth, so I gotta show the proof. That's why I'm pushing their truth, no mercy when I'm in the booth. Got my hands in the air, I wave them side to side, cause I just don't care. Homie, look, got my hands in the air, I wave them side to side, cause I just don't care. Hey, I could care less, bruh, I could care less. I could care less, man, I could care less. I could care less, bruh, I could care less. I could care less, man, I could care less. Got my hands in the air, I wave them side to side, cause I just don't care. Homie, look, got my hands in the air, I wave them side to side, cause I just don't care. Hey, I could care less, bruh, I could care less. I could care less, man, I could care less. I could care less, bruh, I could care less. I could care less, man, I could care less. I could care less, bruh, I could care less. I could care less, man, I could care less. I could care less, bruh, I could care less. I could care less, man, I could care less.